Caroline, it's great to be talking with you, recorded this time. How are you today and where are you?
I am really good, thank you. I've been really looking forward to having this conversation. I am currently just north of Bedford
Oh,
in the
beautiful. And
UK.
it's sunny where you are right now, huh?
You know what? I was about to say ordinarily the answer would be no, but today, hallelujah, we have sunshine.
Here in Barcelona, it has been raining 4 weeks, so I'm glad that you got some sun.
Ooh.
Yeah, but it's good. We need the water. Anyway, I've been looking forward to this mostly because we first met at an event and I heard you on a panel talking eloquently and really punctually, which is just satisfying, so satisfying, about data and ethics and the Met and society and weaving together all of these really interesting themes, which are just very important right now, especially as we're thinking about the increasing use of data, AI, potential use for surveillance, privacy, all of these sorts of topics that you touched on in the panel. And so I just really wanted to invite you onto the show so you can educate me and, and everyone else. And I'd like to start by asking you how you feel in your work with businesses and other organizations, the role of data has changed in recent years and maybe how it's shaping society before
Mm.
we move into kind of the business side.
Um, I think it's really important because I do think data has changed. Now, we've been using data basically since the dawn of time. It's not really a new thing. I mean, since we've had rocks with notches on, then we're using data in some way, shape, or fashion. So we can't pretend it's a new phenomenon.
Mm.
What has really changed is I'd say there's two sides of data. One is very much a risk adverse side, and one is very much about a value add side. And the risk adverse side is about being compliant and it's about making sure we're safe. And that's where I think a lot of the emphasis on data has been in the past.
Mm.
Whereas I think definitely over the last 10 years, there's been this major shift to, well, actually, how can we use this valuable resource and get more from it? So I think that's been fascinating watching it from a business and organizational point of view.
Mm.
But if you look at what it's done for us as a society, then we're more connected than ever. I just to interject slightly, you know what I'm like for just going off on tangents. And I remember watching the UK, the London Olympics, and Tim Berners-Lee came onto the screen, and my son was sitting there with me, and I was like, I got really excited. I was like, "Oh my God, Aidan, that's the person that invented the internet," and his reaction was, "Is he still alive?"
Oh, wow.
Because we couldn't conceive of a time when we didn't have that facility available to us, when we weren't this connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I see the internet and different disciplines like it as being just a way of connecting us and using data to connect us. So that's all of those things I would include in the impact that data's had on our lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love that you're expanding it that far out. And I've just realized, and I realized I didn't do this yesterday. I was wondering why it felt different as a cadence coming into the conversation. So I'll ask it now. The question that I usually ask at the beginning of these conversations, although it has been several months since the last one, and maybe we go here now actually, especially because you've talked about data and connection and the ways in which you think about it as a way to, I suppose, document and talk about and communicate and interact with our environment, is what would you say you think or imagine or sense is going on in the global human psyche right now?
Ooh, well, this is an interesting time to have that conversation, isn't it? It's, it's not like there's not a lot happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
For me, there is this almost like a pause or a reticence. Um, and what I mean by that, and I'm going to touch upon things like the internet and the connectivity, as that we've had this big push of like we are a globe, we are all together. You know, we're bringing everything together, we're sharing knowledge, and you can't get enough data, you can't get enough knowledge, you can't get enough information, and there feels, and it is a feeling that there's almost like a, was that the right thing to do? Is
Mm.
that what we wanted? Is that, it's almost like we're trying to take a step back and go, hang on a second, can we just think about this? And that's what I think is I'm sensing at the moment.
That's so interesting you say that. I've been listening to various different conversations about information and
Mm,
the difference between information and knowledge and how there's kind of this almost verbatim what you said, that like there's this sense in some places of more information is better. If you give people greater connection, it's better, like more.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a point at which you think, okay, well, how much can we actually comprehend? How much can we distinguish what's meaningful, what's valuable, what's important? And is more information and more data more helpful? Like, to what end is it useful?
Mm.
And there's something there around the values piece, that you can have all the information in the world, but if you don't have some way to make meaning from it, which is where I think knowledge and perhaps even wisdom comes in, it's not going to be useful. And you're going to end up in a context where potentially, and I think this is some of what's happening now, you can't see the wood for the trees, or you can't see the meaning for the data level of noise, just because we're trying to attend to everything, which is just not possible. What are your thoughts about that, like making meaning, knowledge, data?
It's really interesting because in one of my first books, which I published, good God, 2017 now. But it's interesting that we're having this conversation now, bearing in mind one of the first chapters that I wrote was something called the hoarding principle. And it was about this idea of we've all got stuck in this idea that more is more. We need more information, we need more data, we just keep giving it to us. We've been hit by an avalanche. And I use the analogy that it's a little bit like we're all data hoarders. So, you know, those TV shows, I don't think they're on anymore. And this shows you that I've got a really bad trash TV habit. This is my Sunday morning. This used to be my Sunday morning watching with myself and my son. We'd curl up and eat all the stuff I wouldn't let him eat during the week and watch trash TV.
That sounds great.
But it was this show about hoarders, and they literally can't live in their homes anymore because they've clogged it so full of stuff.
Yeah.
Very technical term for you there from the Geordie, clogged. But you've had, you know, people who have so many magazines in their kitchen they can't cook anymore. They've got mugs they've been collecting since the dawn of time, so they can't sleep in their bed anymore, and they've got that kind of situation. And effectively, that's what we've done to a lot to a lot of our business and our organisations. We have hoarded data so far past the point of usefulness that we can't use our organisations and our businesses effectively anymore. And what you're feeling like is everybody's been hit with this complete avalanche, and they're overwhelmed to the point of not being able to make a decision. So we used to not have enough information to make a decision, and we've kind of ran straight into the gimme. And now we're at the point of, what on earth do I do with it all? The human brain cannot take as much as we're being pushed upon.
Yeah. And I think the word clogged is so useful because, you know, data feels so abstracted, right? And it's just whether it's visual information or auditory information, what have you. And yet it does slow us down. There comes a point where you become so paralyzed that physically, mentally, I don't know if you've had this, like occasionally when I've been really deep diving into something, there comes a point of saturation where there isn't any point spending more time in the book, in the article, in the podcast, because that's it. It's clogged. It's done. It's like a sponge that can't absorb.
Your brain's gone. That's it. I'm going to go and stand over here now. But
right, and then I think that points towards something else as well, which is the sense of this. And I don't know how you feel about this, but the sense of if we consume more, then we'll have greater utility, and therefore we'll be more valuable. And therefore, I think there is a question of ways in which we value human life. It's like in terms of productivity, efficiency, optimization, utility, that we've kind of somehow, and I don't know if this is a product, in part I imagine it is, of the industrial era, where it's like, you know, it's about output. You've got machines to compete with. You better well make sure that your production is high. And now with knowledge work and data, it's like, well, you now have these quote unquote intelligent machines to compete with. You better make sure that you can parse, which is a very kind of, you know, machine based language to use, but pass as much data as possible, come out with intelligent answers. And the more we become like that, I think the more we lose what makes us not just economically valuable, which is definitely important, but it's a fraction of the bigger picture. What's your, and also within business, which is, you know, there's, what's your take on that?
I almost feel like we're getting things the wrong way around. And I, exactly to hit on that point, I know we feel like, well, we should be doing more. We should be, you know, we're not competing with these machines. We're not competing with these models, and we shouldn't be. But I know people, we've got this sense of, oh my God, the machines are going to come and take over our jobs, but they're, these algorithms are going to do my job better than me. We would, in one of our conversations, we were talking about, I've got this wonderful robotic Hoover that goes around my house. Now, if you want to get technical about it, it has stole my job, and it can have it. I'm more than happy for this thing to wander around and make sure that I have a dust-free home. Thank you very much. And that's the way I would like us to think about these algorithms and these machines. It's how do we alleviate some of what I frankly would say is the boring, the monotonous stuff that I don't want to do. I want to be having these kind of conversations. I want to meet interesting people. I want to learn. I want to share. I just want to be. We've lost that kind of sense of that's not just okay, that's useful to us.
So how do we start shifting that conversation? Because on the one hand, and thinking about this from your perspective as someone who helps organizations tackle some of these deeper, more wicked problems, on the one hand, obviously, businesses have to make money. People have to make money so that we can afford to eat and the rest of it. And yet, if we're making money at the cost of spending time with our loved ones, having meaningful conversations, making art, dancing, eating, like all of the things that might bring someone joy, whatever that looks like, then I think it's it's sad to lose that vitality in that life just in service to efficiency. And so when you're working with business leaders, what are some of the greatest benefits and risks that you see in how people choose to adopt AI or digital transformation, whatever that looks like, because that's obviously bigger than just the use of AI platforms and applications. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities you see?
Well, one of the biggest challenges, I think, and what I'm having some really interesting conversations is because it's the biggest Emperor's New Clothes out there. Everybody's looking at everybody else going, oh, they're doing it, we must. Oh, look at what they say. And it's like a business version of Facebook in that other social media platforms are out there, please, so it's like that because everybody's talking about the wonderful stuff they're doing, and they're like, oh my God, look at what we've achieved, and look at how much money we've saved, and look at the value we've generated. And what a lot of organizations are not talking about, and understandably, is the blood, sweat, and tears, or the sticky tape, or the cardboard Blue Peter models that are going on in the background, propping all of this front stuff up. It's like, the reason I talk about being like Facebook is like somebody's going, look at this incredible, beautiful meal in my home, and they're showing you this bit of the kitchen and not the carnage that is around them where they've got, tomato juice on the walls and all that kind of stuff. You're only getting a snapshot that they want you to see. And that's exactly what's happening with businesses and organizations. You're getting the snapshot that they want you to see. What it's doing is making other businesses believe that they're missing out because they're not in the same state when they couldn't be, because you're only seeing the smoke and mirrors part of it. So the amount of conversations I'm having with boards and with executives which are going, Caroline, we need to get on this AI stuff. We need to do AI. And the first thing I always say is, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Why?
Yes.
What do you want to do it for? What is the problem you're going to solve? What is the direction you want to take the organization in? How is this going to serve your purpose?
Yeah. And what answers do you tend to hear reflected back? Is it kind of like a blank face and a kind of, well, we're falling behind, but we don't know why, and we should be doing it because everyone else?
Ordinarily, that's the first thing. It's like, well, they're doing it. So, it's a little bit like when you're mum and you go, I want to do that with my friends. And well, if your friends chop their arm off, would you?
Yeah.
That was always my mum's response to that kind of stuff. It's a little bit like talking businesses through the grown-up equivalent of that. Go on.
Because it's such a human thing, isn't it? It's not to malign people or to say, well, because we all have it to some extent. For me, for instance, a way that I notice it shows up for me, and I'm sure I've got so many blind spots, but is on Instagram. If I see other artists doing painting and that's their primary living and the rest of it, I'm like, oh, I should be spending more time doing that. Or a speaker that's doing whatever it is. Like, it can be these, but as you say, it's this tiny singular piece of a puzzle which is much bigger, more complex, and that we don't have the spotlight shining on. So how do you begin to kind of say to people, look, I get it, but let's take a few step back, and yeah, how do you kind of help them to shift gears back to that why, back to the purpose, in service of what?
Well, ordinarily, they get there quite quickly themselves when you start asking the right questions. So it's like, well, why do you want to do it? And if the answer is because they are,
Yeah.
really, you
Yeah.
just kind of it's about holding a positive mirror back
Yeah.
up to them so they can have a look at themselves and go, oh, yeah, maybe that wasn't the right answer. But let's break it down. There are things that you should be doing. I mean, I am a big fan of what's happening with AI as a set of tools. And what the evolution of where we are with data. So I am very positive, and I am a big advocate for the power of data and AI and what it can do to help us as societies, as organisations. But it's about breaking it down to look at the actual, real, tangible difference it can make, and helping organisations experiment with it in such a way that it's safe for them, but it does push them, and it's trying to find that the common balance.
Yeah.
It's a bit like being a fitness coach. You want to push them hard enough that they feel it, but
Yeah.
not so hard that they want to give up and not start the journey.
I know that feeling. I started personal training this year, which just sounds so wrong coming out of my mouth. I'm more of a kind of like cake and wine kind of lass, and there have been moments where it's like, if you push me any further, I will cry. And actually, similarly with AI. So maybe let's chat about. I'd love to hear some of the ways in which you think AI tools are making a massive difference, or significant. Doesn't have to be massive, but like meaningful difference. Because obviously, I don't want to just fall into the more is more, scale is better trap. Although in some cases that is obviously the case. So, what are some of the tangible things that you see AI tools supporting and helping businesses to do better? And then, what are some of the narratives or kind of hypey headlines that you're just like, guys, let's just not fall for this, like on both sides? What's useful and what do we need to be a bit more mindful of? And
So I'm going to tackle the second one first and then go back to the first question. So one of the things that I think we need to dissuade people of, and at least a little bit of education goes a long way, is people talk about AI like it's one thing.
Yeah.
So AI, artificial intelligence, it's nothing more than machines pretending to be us. They're imitating what we are, because actually we are incredibly efficient machines and wonderfully powered. I mean, our brains are super powered, and I really think our potential is limitless. But that is all AI is trying to do. And it's not one thing, it's a collection of a large different set of tools that we can use in different ways. And the reason I wanted to kind of go through it, and I know that's the buggy basic way of talking about it, but the reason it's important is because when we get this stuff mixed up and we see it being one entity and we're trying to almost compete, we've talked about, we think we've got to be the same as that. Well, you're not competing against one entity, you're competing against thousands of different type of tools and models. And we can switch and we can compete against a lot of them, but they're designed to do one purpose or two purposes. So they're just really good at that one thing. And I think it's the flexibility and agility of thought that we have as human beings that I think differentiates us. So off on a tangent again, sorry.
No, that's great.
But it's about, for me, understanding that they are just tools, and there's a big set of tools, and some of them are still in their infancy, and some of them we're experimenting with, and some of them are actually got really interesting results. Now, for me, AI's been around for a while, not quite as long as data, but it's been around a while. But it's ignited the public consciousness because of things like Gen AI, which is the large language models, which is the bit that everybody's talking about. It's like, oh, can we have that nice shiny thing? And that's what people kind of associate with AI. But there are so many more powerful tools. I mean, I think there's some advances being made in causal AI, which helps you understand the sort of the root cause of where some of your problems are coming from. Again, I'd probably say still in its infancy, but that to me is a really interesting discipline within that set of tools that I think has potential for the future to make a difference. Things like Gen AI, I really like it. I genuinely really like it. But I think we need to be careful of it because we can't really diagnose why it's doing some of the things that it's doing. And we know we can talk about hallucinations in Gen AI. Now, I think hallucinations is an interesting word to use Because I do
I
not
hate
think
it.
that these machines are just dreaming this stuff up.
No, it's a
There will be a line
fabrication.
of code
Yeah.
somewhere that will explain this. We just can't bother to go and find it most of the time.
Do you think that's what it is?
I'm absolutely do. It'll be some experience it's had. Bearing in mind, we gain experience by repeatedly doing things.
Yeah.
It's doing exactly the same thing. It's just doing it a lot faster. Bear in mind, one discipline, doing it a lot faster. So while we might do a particular activity 10 times and we will improve in the same length of time it'll take us to do it 10, it could have done it a million times. So unless we trace through what it's learned every single time it's gone through each one of us a million times, it'd be really hard for us to diagnose why it's made a particular action. But I'm absolutely convinced they're not true hallucinations. They are a result of a code or an experience it's had at some point.
Okay, so fascinating. Given that most tools are designed within very narrow parameters and that general AI is about kind of being able to use whatever you've been trained on, whatever the AI has been trained on, and generalize across different domains like humans do. So the sense of context, which is also for humans embodied, it's about interbeing, it's within, being embedded within a larger ecosystem or relationships with those around us, whether it's humans, objects, plants, etc. AI doesn't have that yet. And so when people talk about things like autonomous decisions being made on human behalf without necessarily human oversight, what are your thoughts on that? Because there's so much hype around agentic AI. And I just think if you haven't been able to solve issues around transparency or around interoperability of data or the cleaning of data sets, which is still done by hand, or the extraordinary bias that crops up time and again, the cost, huge human cost. Timnit Gebru talks about this quite a lot. And the DAIR sort of organization also talk about this. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes, exactly to your point. The blood, sweat, and tears that you suggested earlier, there's so much of that goes on that if we're still dealing with the same issues of hallucinations / fabrications, how can we possibly conceive of giving private information like bank account, biometric information if you need that, to be able to give these programs the autonomy to do stuff on our body? To me, it just sounds insane. It's like, why would you give a person who is not going to be reliable, who might steal your data and give it to government? You wouldn't do that to a person. You wouldn't give a person that's unreliable that level of access to your life. Why would you do it to a machine? Like, I just, yeah.
But again, it comes back to the purpose. So for me, I'm all about the purpose of why you're doing things in a particular way. So, for example, if I'm dealing with something that is life critical, then I wouldn't have a piece of AI in there that I couldn't trust 100%. But I would have particular tools and other types of AI that I could trust because I know and can understand the reaction that they're going to give me to particular models and how I understand how they're going to act. So, and this is why I think it's important to break down the AI from AI to these are different disciplines. There are some parts of AI that I would trust my bank account details to and my biometrics because they're designed within limits to do specific different type of things.
Like which ones? I'm so curious.
So for me, medical research I think is absolutely fascinating right now. Absolutely fascinating. And I think some of the strides that we're making are incredible. I was reading, and this is why I'm going to kick myself because I can't repeat back to but I was reading some articles about how they're diagnosing some of the proteins within the human body and what that could mean for medical research going forward. And it's absolutely incredible. And I could be making this very too simplistic. I am a bear of little brain. I like keeping things as simple as possible. Making too simplistic, but where we seem to be using the tools for me in the right way and in the really powerful way is they're using it in medical research to not get us to the answer, but to identify the branches that are not worth us going down because we'll be able to, it will stop us. So it's basically stopping the incredible researchers having to go down paths that aren't useful for them.
Huh.
So if you can imagine there's 10 different paths, what it's not doing is telling you which of the 10 is the right path to go down. It's going, those 4 aren't worth any effort. Those 3 look really, really interesting, and I'd focus over there. And those 2 are like, we're not really sure, but maybe not put it. And so what we can do is harness our effort better. And that
Yeah.
to me is the right kind of balance.
I love that, because then there's more of a dialogue between the domain expertise of the people doing the research and then the capacities that these systems have for pattern recognition, for scale and speed, to be able to say, okay, these are the things that maybe don't waste your effort on.
But that's where I think we should be using it, because for me, using data and the technology that sits around it and the AI tools, I imagine it in my head is almost like creating this wonderful smog pile, going off into a Lord of the, Lord of the Rings reference there for a second. But I want it to be a mountain of data that we can usefully stand on top of, so we can see further and we can make better decisions and we can help ourselves. And it's just this wonderful, stable platform to help us do that.
So let's talk a bit about some of the things that need to be in place for that to be realized. So things like ethics boards, or I was talking with a doctor the other day who works in the world of healthcare and AI, which sounds so exciting, as as you've,
it's incredible.
Yeah, and like in terms of a field that stands to gain huge amounts from the appropriate use of AI tools, it's extraordinary. But one of the things that he talked about, and I thought this was really interesting, was the fact that each doctor has to pledge the Socratic oath. The Socratic oath, the Hippocratic oath,
The Hippocratic Oath.
philosophical doctors for everyone. We should do that. The Socratic oath, the Hippocratic oath. So, yeah, first do no harm, the Hippocratic oath, and I thought, okay, so maybe that's an ethical bounding box that within the field of healthcare would mean that AI has to operate within certain parameters. I mean, obviously, that's kind of also wishful thinking, but I'm wondering if there's something that we can take from that approach of first do no harm that we could transplant into other areas beyond healthcare, beyond medicine, that would enable us to make decisions that support the long-term flourishing of the individual human life, society, our ecological sphere. What are your thoughts around where we are with values and ethics and getting
See,
that balance?
I think, even just what you said there is an interesting one about do no harm. And I'm going to jump a little bit, because one of my favourite books, absolutely favourite books on the planet, is a book called Factfulness. Have you read it?
No, but I know of it, but I've not read it.
It's fascinating. And for me, I see it as a data book, because it's got a lot of like what it really means to. It's a positive data book. We like those things. But one of the interesting things in Factfulness was actually the author of the book was a doctor that had worked down in I think it was Africa, and he was talking about this idea of what it means to do no harm, or at least that's what I took from the writing of this. And he's like, do I help the 10 people in front of me who I can make a difference to their lives, or do I do research that can impact and create a vaccine for the 10,000 people around me? And so when you talk about things like do no harm, to me, that's an incredibly complicated statement to make. And it sounds so simple. And a lot of these things, when it comes to things like ethics, which we touched upon, when it comes to data, we sit in this space because it isn't easy. If it was easy, we would have cracked it. If we knew there was an obvious black and white simple answer, we probably wouldn't be even having these conversations, because we would have done it by now. So this is where it comes to, when it comes to things like data, and why things like ethics are so important, that we're just at least having the conversations, because that gives me hope that we're even talking about it, and we're talking about ethics boards. I don't think this is a line to cross. This isn't a tick, we have ethics right. Good God, wouldn't that be a nice thing to think about? It's like, oh yes, we have now evolved into these wonderful beings. We are not there. We're so far from being there. But the increased activity and questions that we're asking ourselves around ethics in this space, for me, means that we're heading in the right direction.
Hmm. That's such an interesting way to respond to that question. And I mean, obviously this is raised quite a lot, but that's the kind of classic trolley problem of scale. Like, do you save one life that's immediately there in front of you, or do you sacrifice the one for the many? And of course, different cultures are going to have different responses to that. And then it's a question of cultural values. And one of the things that I've been really, sorry, go on.
As I said, the self-driving car is the perfect analogy for exactly that, because we have the technology to put self-driving cars on all the roads right now. The technology is not the problem in any way, shape, or form, but it is exactly the trolley problem that's causing us the problems, because you have to look at it in a very stark way, in a very simplistic way, of there will be situations in a driving situations, we as drivers get ourselves into them, where you have to choose of something somewhere's gone terribly wrong.
Yeah.
I'm going to crash the car. Is it me that's going to get hurt? Is it the one pedestrian there? Is it the car that I'm going to hit there? You know, you have to think through all of those possible scenarios, because you do not want to leave it to machine, quite frankly. I want us to have thought about those kind of things. So you have to horribly think through those scenarios when you're creating self-driving cars, and every society values human life in a different way. So some societies would save the child. Some societies would save the old person. Some societies would save the driver at the expense of whatever happened around them. So it isn't the technology that is holding us back. And this is, I'm only using self-driving cars as an analogy here, as one example. The technology department, we have incredible technology and capability out there. Our imagination and our thinking through the ethics is what's stopping us taking the next step.
I'd love to add that. So I saw it was on Instagram the other day. It was a Waymo traffic jam and so definitely that, not to make too much light of it, but there was this other problem, which was, if you're in a jam with drivers and you can just nod to the other person and sign each other on, or it's like, well, hold on, you go there, I have to reverse. Someone can get out of their car and say, well, okay, there's a bit of a bit of a tailback here. Why don't you move back? And anyway, and there was basically a standoff between, it ended up being 5 cars, like 4 Waymos, and then an Amazon truck, all self-driving. And they were just paralyzed in the street and like blinking. And there's tailbacks and tailbacks and tailbacks of actual human-driven cars being like, just let the other car through. And it didn't have any way to be able to negotiate, precisely because of context. And so to your point as well, there are split-second decisions that we make in crisis situations or in unpredictable or chaotic situations, which we might not even be, and often I would suggest, are not consciously aware of in terms of the process. You might have an instinctive response that human to human we might have empathy for. So for instance, someone who might run into a burning building to save a child, a person, a dog, whatever it might be, and others who might say, well, no, hang on, I'm going to go straight to the fire engine or to the fire services, whatever. Like different responses, which you can understand because we have a sense of the plurality of human values, motivations, behaviors that exist. And there's that quality of empathy, one would hope, in most contexts, to be able to say, okay, I can see how you might have done this or chosen this decision. But when you boil it down to a hard and fast rule, even if you have multiple contexts of if X, then Y, there's always going to be something that's unaccounted for, I think.
Absolutely. And I do think that is it. And that's one of the things we can cope, most of us can cope with ambiguity and uncertainty to some degrees. I'm absolutely convinced that all of the stress that we have in our lives is we're dealing with higher levels of ambiguity and uncertainty than a lot of people are comfortable with. But we can do it. If there's a situation we look at and go, we need to figure a way through this, and we will, in whatever step it takes. Maybe it's an experiment, whether it's a try, whether it's to take a step to the side, we can figure this stuff out. They can't.
Yeah.
They absolutely can't, because we haven't programmed them to us. And this is when, I guess one of my frustrations is when people almost put emotions on it. It's like, oh, it's going to take over. It doesn't have the sense of self to do that. There is no emotional attachment other than what we have told it to do.
So one thing I'd love to ask you about, because that's a really interesting can of worms in the sense that it's very easy for us to project sentience, meaning, emotion, the rest of it. And so I think a lot of the problem is the over anthropomorphization of platforms that are designed to look and sound more human. But,
Yeah.
you had this really sort of early on with podcasts that were AI that had breaths and ums and ers. Like, there seems to have been a desire to make as realistic as possible these early models, which I think is interesting, but I don't think it's helpful. In as much as it means that we are much more likely to fall into the trap of kind of, people talk about it as like the intimacy economy, the idea that it's not just about attention, it's also now about synthetic relationships and attachment and projection. And that becomes quite complicated because then you've got issues around political nudging and all sorts of behavioral modification and engineering, social engineering that can come from imagining that you're having a conversation with a sentient,
Exactly.
living, breathing being. So there's that aspect. But then the other thing that I think is really interesting there in terms of emotion is if we manage to create AI that we find it easy to relate to, there's also more credence and less discernment in what we get back as data. And I think that's something else that we've got to keep an eye out on. It's kind of, well, if something is confidently reporting a particular answer, whether it's in medicine or in research, and the more developed models tend to have greater levels of confidence in terms of how they speak out, if it's on auditory mode, or write the answers, the confidence we read as being indicative of certainty and reliability. And you see this in humans as well. If you see a speaker speak with confidence and charisma, we rate them as more credible, even if the data is factually incorrect. And the same is true for machines that present in more human ways. So how can we deal with that problem?
Well, I think I'm going to go, because we touched upon it just a little bit earlier.
So much.
But I don't think we kind of, we're nipping about now, about the human in the loop.
Yes.
So I am 100% fundamental. We need to keep the human in the loop.
Yeah.
We need to make sure, and it's not that we need to have the human oversighting everything, but to exactly that point, where it's making decisions of certainty, occasionally go in and go, I'm just going to randomly pick one and I'm going to go all the way through to make sure the outcome and the output that I'm getting is still what I originally intended to happen. Now, sometimes it can surprise us and go, oh, that's not, so why? And then we need to unpick that uncertainty about why it was so certain when we've decided it's not. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes it can give us opportunities, and actually it's given us more than we expected, which is fine. But we need to make sure that we still have the human in the loop somewhere. And the more critical and the more impactful the decisions and the output it's giving us, the more we should keep the human in the loop.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it seems to me like there's some clear themes emerging here. So human in the loop is really important. The sense that more data and more information isn't necessarily better. The fact that ambiguity is present in all contexts. And so to me, it seems like domain expertise and being able to test randomly, as you've suggested, like just pick a point and have that practice of testing, of interrogating the output.
Very much so.
What would you say are some of the key practices people in business can take? Maybe it's a particular way of testing a system, a tool. What are some of the key hacks people can use to familiarize themselves and also get a truer sense of the capabilities of some of these tools?
Well, I think there's a behavior, a human attribute that I think is so, it's always been important. Now it's more important than ever for me, and that's around curiosity. So the more curious we are, the more we ask ourselves why, the more we ask the machines why, the more we push ourselves. That, the phrase curiosity killed the cat, that's ridiculous. Absolutely. The more curious, I think we should just dive in and be as curious as we possibly are. And it's interesting when you look at organizations now, because it's almost like we want to be predictable. We want to know that if we build a certain department, it'll happen this way. We want to know that 2 + 2 will always equal 4. It does, by the way. Don't worry, I'm not suggesting it doesn't. But we want that predictability and that certainty. But one of the things that we lose as a result of that is the time and the ability and the empowerment to be curious. And I think one thing that we can really do to make a shift difference is to encourage that curiosity, and to not just accept but celebrate failure as a result of that curiosity. And those two things, I think, are game changers for a lot of organizations.
And yet, and I completely agree, and yet in contexts where people are fearful about their jobs, they're going to buckle down on, I need to be able to hit my targets, I need to prove X, Y, and Z. So it becomes quite a psychological organizational culture question as well at that point, which is when people are in this potential place of contraction of, I have to hit my targets, which I totally get. How can we, like, who is it that we need to turn to? Is it the leaders to say, okay, if you're going to be using these tools and some of these tools can really help augment performance, how do we build in that leaning towards experimentation in which failure is seen as learning as opposed to something to be ashamed of?
Well, I think this is where it is hard, and I 100% understand the economy that we're in right now. People are losing their jobs. It is really, really tough out there. So all of this is said with an understanding of that context. And I think a lot of it is on the obligation of the organisation to create a little bit of space for that. So it isn't the kind of analogy I would use. It isn't about suddenly taking the hamster off the hamster wheel, because we're not going to change that overnight in organisations. But it is about buying the hamster 10 minutes off that wheel. So, an example of how you could do that is in any organisation, decide that, and I'm making this up, but decide that from Friday lunchtime, nobody will have a meeting. There's no meetings. Because it's not just about the outputs that we're finding in a lot of organisations. It's like, people have a badge of testament, a badge of honour that's like, I've been in meetings back to back since 8 o'clock this morning till 6 o'clock, and it's like wham, wham, wham. And you have people, and I've done it myself, go, I am really sorry, but I need to take 5 minutes to go to the toilet because I have just sat here in this chair the whole time. And we're using that like this is a good thing.
Yeah.
And this drives me insane. So, go and say, right, from Friday afternoon, no meetings. It's thinking time. I'm giving you the space to do that. And I think it would be a very brave organisation that started doing it. But don't, if half a day feels too much to do that, pick an hour.
That's crazy.
2 hours, and just start small and see what happens.
So I was thinking about this the other day because Google used to do that. You used to have Friday afternoons, I think it was creative time, and you could just use it. And again, I always feel conflicted putting business and economic value on things which are inherently valuable in and of themselves, like a creative process or imagining or thinking or gardening or spending time with friends. Like, it doesn't have to have, I think we're too skewed in the sense of in some cultures, not in all cultures, we have to make money, we have to spend all our time at work, we have to be in meetings, we have to perform busyness because and it's not the same as productivity or performance.
It's
either.
Not. I don't think it's the same. Sorry.
No, and no, yes, and it can be kind of this, as you said, like this badge of honor or this flex of look how ... I am, when actually, paradoxically, and I was reading about this end of last year, that companies that have a culture that makes space for and encourages creativity in various different forms, they actually grow better, their performances increase. And when you look at educational contexts, if you give people, children, access to time within the week where they're engaged in art, music, theatre, creative writing, then their performance in STEM increases. The same is not true. If you cut STEM out, the creative side doesn't necessarily increase. So it's one of the few things where we kind of say, oh, that's the first to go. We don't have the time, the luxury, to dream, to imagine, to create, to play. But back to your point about curiosity and ambiguity, that has to be in the territory of the imaginal, of playing, of testing, of dreaming. And if we lose that...
what is the point? I mean, seriously, what is the point if we lose that? So
Yeah.
to me, this is the fundamental stuff. This is the stuff that, is our sense of being, of who we are. But I do understand how hard it is. Many, many moons ago, earlier on in my career, I had my own team and I created No Meeting Wednesday. So I ate my own dog food. I created a space for my team. So none of us had meetings Wednesday. And this was well pre-COVID, but I didn't make them come into the office so they could work in the library or they could work from home. And the productivity of my team during that time was incredible. And it was fascinating what they used that time for and how much better it made the team collectively. What was also interesting was the proportion of my time that I spent then fending off other teams and other parts of the organisation who were very unhappy that I'd given my team that space.
Wow.
And that part to me was really fascinating. So it didn't matter how much I could demonstrate the improvements in my team and what was happening as a result. Some people could just not get their head around the benefits that could portray.
Wow. Back to data again. The data can be clear as day. And if there is psychological resistance, you're not going to make change.
But it's for me, this whole area is fascinating. So it was just when you were speaking there about the art side and the creativity side and how fundamental that is to us as humans. I was really lucky last year. I was talking to some incredible AI artists, which I know can be, for some people, a little bit of an oxymoron. Fully aware of that, don't worry. And I was leading a conversation between a bunch of AI artists and more traditional artists of lots of different disciplines. It was a fascinating conversation. That'll be over a drink. I'll tell you all about that.
Yes,
one.
Please.
Fascinating conversation. But what to me seemed, and this was just my own personal opinion, as part of that, we were looking at the art from that either both sides had generated, and it was I'd done it deliberately as a sort of old school American debate type thing. So it's like, you put your case forward, you put your case forward.
Very provocative.
But for me, one of the AI artists had this show, and they'd actually, as part of the show, went through their process and demonstrated their process of how they'd got to the art. And for me, this was the fascinating part because, quite frankly, what you would call more traditional artists, when I looked at their outputs, some of that stuff blew my mind, and some of it was simplistic, but some of it was just, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was incredible. It was a different sense that I got from the AI artists. And one in particular stood out for me, and it was the one that had the whole process. So while their end output did not give me the same sense of the results of the other artists, the process did.
That's fascinating. That is fascinating.
And it was that part that I found the inspiration, and that was the part that I felt an emotional attachment, because for me, there should be an emotional attachment to art. It should make you feel something. Yeah. And so it was the process, it was what they'd gone through that gave me the emotional attachment, not their end result, whereas it was very different reaction to the other types of art.
Well, this is such a juicy conversation, Caroline, and definitely to be continued over drinks. But let's stay here a little bit, because this is also something that I think is so important when we're talking about collaboration and creativity. I was having a conversation with two friends of mine who are very creative women. Eloise Gillot, who's an extraordinary mural artist and adventurer. She's also a free diver. She's just wildly amazing. And my other wildly amazing friend called Blanche Ellis, she's an extraordinary musician and painter, and does like live scribing at conferences and events. So they move in very interesting worlds. And we were doing a pilot episode for Do Radio all about creativity. And one of the things that came up was this relationship, or the relationships between the finished product, if we can call it that, so the thing that is the output, the results of the creative process, and then the creative process itself, and how actually these things, they're related, but they are also different in the sense that, like you say, you might not be moved by the final object, artifact, creative piece, But the process of relationship, interrogation, tweaking, changing, curation, prompting, like all of that is a very human thing to relate. And I think creativity is inherently relational, whether you're doing it by yourself and you're painting like I do, and you're relating to the reference image and then to the painting itself, or you're responding to an AI tool that is giving you something back from which to kind of then change your prompt, change your perspective, or there's something inherent in the process that I think is really special. And yet I've also seen some really interesting research that finds that even in situations where people can't explicitly say, okay, I think this is made by a person and this is made by an AI tool, even when there's ambiguity in categorizing those two things, when the people who are in this context are scanned and you look at their brain activity, there is a greater positive emotional valence. Well, the kind of the emotional response to the human artwork is not only stronger, but it's more positive than to the AI generated stuff. But again, that's the artifact, it's not the process. So there's just so much richness and nuance here.
I find it absolutely fascinating. And
Yeah.
we got into the conversation. We did not get a conclusion, but we got into the conversation of what part is the art, and actually who is the artist in each context.
That's so interesting. What were the key themes that came out of that? Was there any coherence in the answers?
It was. We went round in a lot of circles with that one, as you can imagine. But it was so much clearer with more traditional art.
Yeah.
But then we did get into some nuances about photography as a form of art. And is it the person that sets up the shot, or is it the person that presses the button on the machine?
Yeah.
Now, technically in law, because we got into some of these conversations as well, in law, if you take photography, it's the person that presses the button on the machine. But we had this whole raft of argument about that's not the creative part.
Yeah.
So then we overlaid some of that conversation onto the AI stuff, because you could have multiple different AI artists involved in the process. And is it the person that does the last click? Is it the person that's created a set of images to take stuff from? But again, I come back to, for me, it isn't about getting to the answer. It's about asking the questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And also about acknowledging the complexity and the relationships involved in the process and reaching this outcome. So I think, would you say that one of the things, thinking about now sort of capacities that would be wise for us to pay attention to, perhaps to enhance, no matter where we are thinking about using AI, whether it's in our business or personal use, whatever, what are some of the capacities that you think would be good for us to pay attention to? Human capacities.
I think to help people get over the fear factor, if you press the wrong button, the world will not explode. It's okay. So I think I would just encourage people to try and find a medium or a mechanism that works for them. So for me, the fascinating things about AI, and one of the things that I think is really incredible, is how it can bring people that I would say aren't really technically highly literate into this world and be a useful sense to them. So for me, I will use my dad as an example. My dad's 82. Make sure I get his age right. I would get in trouble for that. 82-year-old, and I find it fascinating that I do what I do, and if you put a computer in front of him, he would run horrified from the room. It's a complete dichotomy. But by putting things like an Alexa or tools and things around his house, he can, Alexa, what's the weather? Is there something I need to be aware of? We can send him lists to remember. And he's engaging with technology in a different way that is accessible for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I love about it. So how do we encourage more of that? How do we make this world more inclusive and bring people on this journey with us and help them be curious and help them try different things and remind us that we're never done, we're never baked. There's always more that we can learn and more we can do.
So one of the themes that I heard you speak about on the panel was privacy and being wise in how we use these sorts of tools, and some, again, of the ambiguous issues that arise when thinking about giving our data and what we might give up or exchange. So I remember when when I heard you speak, you're talking about work with the Met and surveillance and safety being sometimes in tension with one another.
Mm.
And I'm curious, you can sort of come at this however you feel moved to, but I'm curious what you think are some of the tensions that we need to be mindful of when we're using AI tools.
So for me, it's like so many other things in life, it's about a value exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are comfortable that what you are getting back is worth what you are giving up, then I don't have a problem with that. So I'm going to tackle the social media stuff first, because I find it absolutely incredible the amount of data, be that photography, be that information, be that, whatever, that people will happily give up to social media.
Yeah.
Everybody's putting their whole life on there. That kind of fascinates me. I'm a bit more of a Luddite when it's like, take a step back. But if you are, I'm not suggesting for a second those are bad things. I am suggesting to take a step back and say, you have given that information out to the equivalent of a stranger that sits next to you on a bus.
Yeah.
So if you are happy that they, or somebody like that you don't know, has all that information, then crack on, have fun, feel free. If you're not, I would like you to think about what you're doing it and why. And then think about that value exchange, because if it's you're happy that you feel like you're getting enough from it, that they're entertaining you in a particular way, and that's worth spending hours of your life on, I am not one to judge in any way, shape, or form, but I want people to be comfortable that that's what's happening, because you are paying for those platforms in a particular way. When it comes to things like government and police forces, this is where I think it's interesting, because I can see there's value in giving certain information to those kind of institutes. I think that, but it's important, and I think it's more on governments and police forces and health services to articulate what they're using our data for and why, and what the benefits are that is going to come back to us from doing it. So personally, I would be comfortable in certain circumstances with sharing some of my location data if it makes it safer for every other woman out there.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'd like to know that's what you're using it for and not something else. And I would like to have the trust that that is the sole purpose that you're using that data for. Likewise with health data. So I found it fascinating, jumping back to COVID, which actually feels like this bizarre time in human history, where we were trusting certain social media platforms, but we weren't trusting things like the NHS with our health data.
Yeah.
But it was trying to keep us safe. So what was it about the understanding of the value exchange between the two that we didn't understand or weren't aware of or weren't being told at the time about how they were going to use our data? So for me, I think it's about transparency. I think about understanding what our data is being used for, why, and us being comfortable with that knowledge. And if you're not, ask questions.
Yeah. That trust piece is so huge. And I think especially when there's so much unpredictability. I mean, that life is always unpredictable. It's just sometimes we feel more secure and in control than others. And it's true, if you're going through an economic crunch, the precarity does increase. But at the same time, I think in many sort of like more peace times or flourishing times, people still get made redundant, people still get ill. And so there's always this question of what do we value? How do we trust those in organizations and institutions that have the power to help support our health or set food standard practices or police our streets? So there's also that bigger question. When things are chaotic, I think public trust goes down, and then those questions become in some ways a lot more charged and loaded in the minds of folks.
That is when it's so important that those those bodies are really clear, and there is nothing wrong with asking for our help. Absolutely nothing wrong with asking for our help. but we don't want to be told what to do. There is something in, and I have to be honest, I am totally like this. If you tell me I can't do something, then that'll be the first thing I go
Yeah.
to find out what I can do. I think that's just a slightly cook-like nature that I have in there somewhere.
Yeah, I love it.
But it's nobody likes being told. We like understanding why.
Yeah.
So we need more of the why and less of the thou shalt.
Yes, 100%. 100%. So we're coming to the end of our conversation, and I would love to ask you, as a kind of closing question, before the practicality of where people can find you and reach out to you, how do you find beauty and orient yourself towards life on dark days?
Everybody has dark days. Unbelievable, and it's actually. I take something from my son. My son's an artist. I can't draw stick people, so I have no idea where this talent comes from in any way, shape, or form. But it was something I noticed he did, which is he looks up more than I do. So when I'm feeling low or down, I get myself outside, even if it's raining, because there's beauty in rain, there's beauty in thunder, there's beauty in lightning. And just go outside and look up, and you can see some of the most beautiful sights.
I love that. That's lovely and meaningful and easy to do if you just remember.
It's the remembering part to do it, because when you are stuck and it feels dark, you can feel trapped, but you have a choice. Everybody can find a window.
Thank you. And so if people want to find out more about your brilliant books and your consultancy and your work and the events that you're speaking at, where are the best places for them to reach out to you?
The best places, we have a website, so carruthersandjackson.com. It's pretty easily accessible if you can spell Carruthers. So we'll put that in the title.
We'll put that in the notes as well.
Put that in the notes for everybody. Or I'm on LinkedIn, and I love people reaching out to me. So those are probably the two simplest ways.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to that glass of wine and unpacking more about creativity and AI and tech and humanity and ambiguity and chaos.
It's going to be in a few bottles of wine.
A few bottles. I'm up for it. Thank you so much for today. I really enjoyed it. It was a real treat.
It was lovely talking to you. Thank you for having me.